Hey everyone, and welcome back. So today we were supposed to have an optional live session where I went over the notes with you in person on the Google Meet, but I found out that I actually have a seminar I have to go to at 2 o'clock. And so instead we are just going to do a video version of the notes. So today we are starting the structures of the nervous system. Yesterday you did an introduction to the nervous system hyperdoc, where you kind of got to start exploring the different aspects of the nervous system and looking at some of the vocabulary. But today we're actually going to start breaking down the different structures of the brain, the divisions of the nervous system, and some of the basic functions. And we're going to continue focusing on those structures for the rest of this week. And then starting next week, we'll really start diving into the functions and the disorders, because there is a lot of information to be covered in the nervous system. But I know that, with a little bit of studying and a lot of practice, you'll be able to get it in no time. So let's go ahead first and talk about the different divisions of the nervous system. Now, there are two main divisions that we start off with, and that is central versus peripheral. And part of your hyperdoc yesterday was to watch either the central nervous system crash course or the peripheral nervous system crash course. You could watch either one, but I just wanted you to start looking at that division between the two. So the central nervous system is the primary function, is kind of to receive and to sort out the information that comes in from our environment and from inside the body to help determine what the appropriate action should be. So for example, we take in things like light and sound and heat and touch, and our brain has to translate that into a signal that we then use to determine what the next step is going to be. That is part of your central nervous system. Your peripheral nervous system is the one that actually connects your CNS to your different limbs and your organs to essentially relay that information between the brain and the spinal cord and the rest of the body. So your peripheral nervous system is the part that takes in the information. So, for example, your CNS says, I'm going to touch, the hot oven, and it says, ooh, that is hot. That then translates to your PNS, your peripheral nervous system, and it takes that information like the oven is hot and says, what are we going to do about it? We need to move our hand. And so it translates that to a movement of telling our hand to move away from something. Your peripheral nervous system then breaks into two other components, your somatic and your autonomic nervous systems. Your somatic nervous system is responsible for movement of voluntary muscles and the process of the reflex arc. So that example of me saying this is hot, I need to move my hand away, that's a reflex. That is part of your somatic nervous system. You also have an autonomic nervous system, which is the unconscious control of the brain, and it regulates body functions that we don't really think about, but that just happen on their own, such as your heart continuing to pump, breathing, your eyes dilating, the process of digestion, the process of urination, and sexual arousal. These are all things that are controlled by your autonomic nervous system. And you can remember that because auto means that something automatically does something. And so your autonomic nervous system automatically controls those things without you thinking about it. Within your autonomic nervous system, we also have two more branches. And I'm going to show you a picture of all this in a second. But you can break your autonomic nervous system into sympathetic versus parasympathetic. Your sympathetic nervous system is your fight or flight nervous system, and you've probably heard of this before. Fight or flight basically means it's how the body reacts to stresses, such as a threat or an injury. So it causes your muscles to contract and your heart rate to increase, and in some situations, you are able to stand your ground and you fight off whatever the stress, and in some situations, you run away or you flee from the stress. Your parasympathetic nervous system is called the rest and digest nervous system, and it controls functions of the body when you're just at rest. So it helps to maintain homeostasis, and it causes the muscles to relax and the heart rate to decrease. It's basically the opposite of your sympathetic nervous system. So here's what an image of all of that together looks like. At the top, you have your CNS, your central nervous system, and it contains things like your brain and your spinal cord. And then it sends information to your PNS, your peripheral nervous system, which involves different cranial and spinal nerves, and it's the communication line between the CNS and the rest of the body. And then you break into those sensory and motor divisions, your autonomic versus your somatic, and then your sympathetic versus your parasympathetic. So it's kind of like a branch of, imagine a tree and different branches that branch off of each other. That's how your nervous system works. So a neuron is the nerve cell. So just like when we covered the urinary system, the basic functional unit of the kidney was a nephron. The basic functional unit of the nervous system is a neuron. And it has different structures that you need to learn as well. And tomorrow we're actually going to be making our own little 3D neurons using the materials that were sent home in your baggies. So the first thing we're going to look at are the dendrites. And the dendrites are those short branched extensions, the like finger-like extensions that come off the end of the nerve cell. And along with the impulses that are received from the other cells at the synapse, these are transmitted to the cell body. And so you have many dendrites per one neuron. The axon is the long thread-like part in the center of the neuron. And this is the part of the nerve cell where the impulses are conducted from the cell body to the other cells. And you only have one axon per neuron. The myelin sheath is an insulating layer that forms around the nerves, and it includes those in the brain and the spinal cord. And it's made up of a protein and a fatty substance. So if you're looking at our little neuron over here, we have the dendrites coming off the end. And then we have the axon, which is this long thread-like part here. And we have these little beads of myelin that wrap around the axon. And then at the other end, you have these three branches that come off, and those are your synapse. And the synapse is the actual structure that allows a neuron to pass the chemical or electrical signal to another neuron. So one neuron connects to another neuron at the synapse and the dendrites. And then at the end of that one, you have the synapse and another dendrite. And that's how they connect, and the electrical conduction is transmitted across the nerve cells. We're going to go more in depth on the functions of a neuron tomorrow, like I said, when we do our 3D neuron, but this is just some of the basic idea. A stimulus is an impulse, basically. A stimulus helps to create an impulse that then travels into the neuron, through the dendrites, and out onto the axon. At the end of that axon is where the neurotransmitter is released, and this is what actually carries the impulse across the synapse to the dendrites. Basically, this is the process of nerve impulse and how communication is spread throughout the nervous system. There are many different types of neurons. Sensory neurons are the ones that send information from the sensory receptors, such as those located on the skin, your eyes, your ears, your nose, your tongue, and they send them to the spinal cord and the brain. Motor neurons are the ones that send that information from the central nervous system back to the body in order to cause a reaction. And then associative or interneurons are the ones that send information between the sensory and the motor neurons. So sensory is the one that takes in the information from your environment, from your senses. Your motor neurons are the ones that cause a reaction, causing our limbs to move or heart rate to increase, various different things. And your associative neurons are the ones that cause that communication between the two. Now we're looking at the central nervous system and the structures of the central nervous system. And really the main two structures of the CNS are the brain and the spinal cord. So the brain is one of the largest and most complex organs in the body, which is made up of over 100 billion nerves all working together to send and receive messages to and from the body. Your spinal cord is that long, thin, tubular structure that runs along the spine, and it extends all the way from that medulla oblongata at the base of the brain through the brainstem and to the lumbar region of the vertebral column. And remember, lumbar is one of the part at your lower back. And within your brain, you have different sections. The main component of your brain is the cerebrum. The cerebrum actually performs higher functions like being able to interpret touch and vision and hearing, as well as speech, reasoning, emotions, learning, and fine control of movement. This cerebrum is divided into two hemispheres, the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere, and is also divided into 4 lobes. So you have your frontal lobe, which is in green. We're looking at a side view of the brain right now. So the green section is your frontal lobe. It's up here, exactly where your frontal bone would be. And then on the back, at the base of the brain, you have that occipital lobe in red, and that would also be where your occipital bone would be. On the sides where your parietal bone would be, you also have your parietal lobe, which is in blue. And then over here where your temporal bones would be, you have your temporal lobe, which is in yellow. So it's very similar to the structures of the skull, but these are just the structures of the brain. And just know that those 4 lobes make up the cerebrum. Each part of the brain or each lobe has its own functions. The frontal lobe has cognitive functions and controls voluntary movements or voluntary activity. Your temporal lobe processes different memories and integrates them with the sensation of taste, sound, sight, and touch. And this is why sometimes when you hear certain songs or you smell certain things or you taste certain foods, you automatically remember particular memories. That is your temporal lobe. Your parietal lobe processes information about temperature, taste, touch, and movement and is able to translate that into usable information. And then your occipital lobe's primary function is to be responsible for your vision. So here's another image of what all of that looks like. As you can see on this diagram, it encompasses the cerebrum, which includes, of course, all 4 of those lobes. It also points out convolutions or gyri, which you can see here, which is also one of your vocab terms, as well as the sulci, which are the little ridges in between the different folds. And then down at the bottom, we have our brain stem, which is composed of 3 different parts. So you have your midbrain, your pons, and your medulla, which all make up the brainstem, as well as your cerebellum, which sits right below your cerebrum, and we're going to cover those in just a minute. So your diencephalon is located between your cerebrum and your midbrain, and the 2 major structures that make up your diencephalon are the thalamus and hypothalamus, and the vital functions of your hypothalamus include things like autonomic nervous control, your cardiovascular system, temperature regulation, appetite, and sleep. Your limbic system is located within the center of your brain, and it kind of wraps around the brainstem. Your limbic system is a complex set of structures that includes the hypothalamus, hippocampus, amygdala, and several other nearby areas. And these are involved with motivation, emotion, mood, and memory. Basically, your limbic system plays its primary role to control your emotions. Interesting fact before we move on is you actually are able to override your limbic system. It takes a lot of practice and control, but think about an example of like when you're really upset or you're on the verge of crying or something, and you're able to kind of trick your brain into not doing that. That is you having control over your own limbic system and kind of taking over and causing it to redirect itself. Next, we have the cerebellum, and the cerebellum is that little ball that sits under the base of your brain, and it receives information from the sensory systems, the spinal cord, and the other parts of the brain that help to regulate your motor movements. This also coordinates voluntary movements such as posture, so being able to sit up straight, balance, coordination, and speech, resulting in the smooth and balanced muscular activity. Basically, if you were to have something wrong with your cerebellum, if you were to go to try to pick up something, I'm able to hold this pretty steadily. But if there was something wrong with my cerebellum, I might would be really shaky, or I might would have very like jerky movements. So our ability to be able to move freely and smoothly comes from our cerebellum. Your brain stem is that piece that comes off the bottom of the brain that looks like a stem, and it is actually composed of 3 separate pieces: the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. The midbrain serves important functions in motor movement, particularly in movements of your eyes and your auditory and visual processing, so your hearing and your vision. The pons helps to aid in the control of your breathing, hearing, taste, and balance. And then your medulla oblongata controls a lot of autonomic functions such as breathing, digestion, heart and blood vessel functions, swallowing, and sneezing. Within the structures of the brain, you have different meninges, and these three meninges are the membranes that line the skull and the vertebral column to help enclose the brain and the spinal cord. So the outermost layer of the skull is your dura mater. As you can see here on the image, you have your scalp, you actually have your skull bone, and then right below your skull bone, you have your dura mater. And then as you go down further, you have your arachnoid matter or arachnoid, which is just the middle layer. And then below that, you have your pia mater or pia mater, which is the innermost layer lining of the skull. Within the brain, you also have ventricles, just like you do in the circulatory system in the heart. Your ventricles are the lined cavities kind of deep within the brain, and they are filled with cerebrospinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid is a clear, colorless fluid that acts as a shock absorber and a source of nutrients for the brain. Your choroid plexus is that rich network of blood vessels that are located within the brain itself. Next, we're going to be looking at the spinal cord, which begins at the foramen magnum and goes all the way down to your second lumbar vertebrae. Your spinal cord is surrounded by cerebrospinal fluid to help cushion it and protect it, and also to provide nutrients to the spinal cord. And it functions as a reflex center and a conduction pathway between the brain and the other parts of the body. Your peripheral nervous system consists of 12 cranial nerves and 31 pairs of spinal nerves. For the purpose of this class, you do need to memorize the 12 cranial nerves, their location, and their function, but you will not have to memorize the 31 pairs of spinal nerves. You just need to know the purpose of each. Cranial nerves send and receive signals to and from the brain, and these are most commonly related to your senses. And your spinal nerves send and receive signals from the rest of the body to control muscle movement. So here's a list of 9 of the 12 cranial nerves. The other 3 are on the next page. I'm just going to go quickly through and pronounce each of these for you, but you can pause and take notes on each one on your own. So number 1 is your olfactory nerve. Number 2 is your optic nerve. 3, oculomotor nerve. 4, trochlear nerve. 5, trigeminal nerve, which, fun fact, is the largest of your cranial nerves. 6 is your abducens nerve. 7 is your facial nerve. 8 is your vestibulocochlear nerve. 9 is your glossopharyngeal nerve. So pause and take notes on these on your own. And then number 10 is your vagus nerve. 11 is your accessory nerve. And 12 is your hypoglossal nerve. Again, you can pause and take notes on your own. And then on the right side of the screen here, we have an image showing you where each of these are, and I will provide you also with a link to a study tool that you can use to study all of these. And then here's an image that kind of breaks down what each of those different nerves do related to whether it's sensory or motor and what its actual function is. Each nerve is also numbered in a particular order, and that number is the same across the board. So nerve number 2 is always going to be the optic nerve. Nerve number 9 is always going to be the glossopharyngeal nerve. The numbers are consistent across the board. And the last slide that we're going to be talking about today is your autonomic nervous system, and this is your motor system. So remember, autonomic means that things that happen automatically on their own, and this system does break into that sympathetic versus parasympathetic. Remember that sympathetic is fight or flight, parasympathetic is rest and digest, and then your somatic nervous system is the nerves that are located along the spinal cord, and they help connect your skeleton, your muscles, and the joints of your brain. So I know this is a lot of information to take in all at one time. Of course, you can pause and rewatch this and go back and take notes as you need. I am going to try to post a PDF of the notes, like a guided notes page for this system, just because I think it will be helpful to you. So hopefully I have posted that sometime today while you're watching this video. If you want to use it, fine. If you aren't able to, or you're not interested and you'd rather just take notes on your own, that is also fine. But hopefully you find that helpful, because I know this system does have a lot of information in it. So go back and rewatch this as many times as you want, and also feel free to always ask me questions. If there's a concept you really just don't understand and you would like better clarification, feel free to ask me, and I will do my best to try to explain things in a way that makes more sense to you. I will see you all tomorrow for our live session at 2 o'clock. If you have not already picked up your baggie with your beads and pipe cleaners and things that you're going to need for our class tomorrow, please reach out to me as soon as possible so I can get that to you. And otherwise, have a great day, guys. Bye.